Herzliches Willkommen hier in Frankfurt. Probably a little known fact, but I'm actually half German. My mother is from Mainz and I grew up speaking German, but I'm going to spare you this morning and not do this presentation in German. I do want to welcome all of you today. We know you have very busy schedules, and to come spend a full day with us and we hopefully will make it very worth your while. I think it's a good agenda, and we're going to touch, I think, on some very relevant topics. And we'll let you be the judge by the end of it, but thank you so much for being here. It's certainly our pleasure to be able to host you and have you hear a little bit more about what's going on at Medidata. So first off, I just want to recognize our customers and partners, because without all of you, we wouldn't be here today as the global leader that we are. We wouldn't be able to move forward with the innovations that we have that you're going to hear more about today. But I'd like to call out a few who have been very long-standing partners to Medidata and customers who are here today, and I've had a chance to say hello to a few of you. And we have AbbVie, we have Bayer, we have Johnson & Johnson, we have Grünenthal, we have Boehringer Ingelheim and Novartis, we have Chiltern and Sanofi and Icon, and then a host of other companies who've joined us today, and it's really a pleasure to have you all. So I think Christian said, he mentioned that I was one of the co-founders of Medidata. I've had the pleasure of leading Medidata with my good business partner, Glenn DeVries, who's the president of the company, for almost 2 decades now. And I think one of the things that I'm so happy about and excited about is when we started Medidata nearly 2 decades ago, we had a plan, we had an idea. We were 7 people working at a very small office, and we said, we would love to develop technology that ultimately has a positive impact on patients' lives. And that seemed like a big dream for us a long time ago. And when you look at where the company is today, and when you look at what the relevance of technology and data and analytics is in the world that we're entering, we're finally in a position where we can have a real impact on patients' lives through the work that all of you do, obviously, because you're the ones who are ultimately coming up with the medicines, doing the science, doing all the hard work, but we can provide you with some of the infrastructure and some of the knowledge to make better decisions. And I think that's one of the things, one of the main themes that we want to touch on today. I think it's probably the most exciting time in terms of scientific innovation that we've seen in decades. If you look at the kinds of medicines that are either in the lab or progressing through clinical development or coming to market now, we're actually impacting patients' lives in a way that we haven't for many, many decades. And that's very exciting. But it also comes with a lot of challenges. And so, how you address those challenges, how you move the whole industry forward, how you focus on safety, how you focus on efficacy, all of the things that I think are day-to-day topics for all of us, I think are very, very relevant for us to be thinking about. And not just thinking about, but how do we change as an industry? How do we evolve as an industry to meet these new challenges, but also to make the most of those opportunities that we're seeing? So one of the things that has become, I think, a primary topic is looking at the concept of precision medicines or more precise treatments. And that's wonderful because they're smarter treatments. They have a significantly greater impact potentially on helping patients to lead better lives, quality of life, improved length of or duration of life, et cetera. But it comes with its own new set of challenges, right? We're now introducing other complexities into what has already been a very complex development process. Patient scarcity has always been an issue, but it becomes an even bigger issue when you're dealing with a smaller and smaller subgroup of patients, or maybe even an N of 1 potentially in the future. And so how do you think about that? How do you deal with that in the development environment? We see data. Data is both a problem and it's an opportunity. There's an abundance of data. We've always had an abundance of data, but now there's even more, because we have sensors, we have genomic data, we have real-world data, we have big data. There's data everywhere. Well, how do you make sense of that data in a way that allows you to extract wisdom and knowledge and make better decisions? And I think that's one of the complexities that we certainly at Medidata spend a lot of time thinking about and investing in these days is how do you end up with much more actionable data that allows you to make better decisions? We have a very specific way at Medidata of thinking about clinical development overall. On the one hand, we think about the science of clinical development. And we talk about that in terms of RAVE and collecting data and how you manage that data. Because without data, you can't prove out your scientific thesis. There is no trial without the data. There is no clinical development without the clinical trial. And so one part of our business is really focused on how do you collect that data, whether it's directly from the patient or from the clinic, how do you manage that data? The other part of our business is really focused, is what we call EDGE, is focused on the business of clinical trials. There are a lot of logistics that happen. Trial planning, which sites are you going to go to find the right patients? How are you going to pay your investigators? How are you going to manage all the documents? There's a lot of other business challenges that you have and complexities when you run a clinical trial. And that all comes together with what we're calling MEDS and now artificial intelligence as well. And MEDS brings all that data together. And we're going to spend a bit more time diving specifically into some of those areas in a minute. So first of all, everyone talks about data now, irrespective of the industry, but certainly in our industry. And one of the questions is, why do certain data strategies fail? There is an abundance of data out there, but if you don't have the right data, and if you haven't done the hard work of making it fit for purpose, meaning that you've curated it the right way, then it's very, very difficult to get actionable wisdom or knowledge from that data. And I think that's one of the issues that we as an industry are grappling with. We can buy a lot of data. We can bring in data from our trials and from other sources. But how do you curate that data to make it actionable? I think one of the other fallacies is, well, we have great analytic tools out there. Yes, there are wonderful predictive analytic tools out there. But if you feed the wrong data in, you're going to get a bad result. And I think that's where everyone is struggling right now. It's not just in our industry specifically, but across industries. But in our industry, it's that much more important because patients' lives are at stake. So we have a very disciplined thought process around this, around how you have to first ingest data. And this is what I'm talking about specifically, is around what we're doing with MEDS and AI, ingesting the data. So you have to be able to ingest data from all kinds of sources, whether it's from our platform, which is very broad, as you'll hear in a little while, but also from third parties, whether it's EHR data or genomic data or any other kind of data that you can think of. You then want to take that data and you want to curate it, right? You want to make sure that you've actually done that hard work. And that's one of the things that over the last 2-3 years, we've invested so heavily in our data science organization. It's how do you automate that curation process? And quite frankly, we haven't been able to 100% automate it. There's still a lot of manual work that goes into it, but we've been able to automate an awful lot of it. And once you have that curated data, then I think the focus becomes on, well, what are the right tools to do the right kind of analytics? You want predictive analytics. The advancement in AI today is unbelievable. The machine learning, the predictive analytics, the NLP, it allows you to do things we couldn't have done a decade or 2 decades ago. If you have the right data source and you have it curated well, then you can start to apply these techniques to that data, and that's where you get the actionable insights. And one of the things that we spend a lot of time thinking about is not just, well, can we give you the right tools, but can we give you the right guidance on how to use those tools most effectively? Because for most of us, this is a brave new world that we're entering. Maybe some of the techniques are new to us, or understanding the value of some of the data or the answers that we're getting from the data is quite difficult. And so in the early stages, at least, I think having not just the tools, but having the expertise to help you understand and utilize them to get the most value possible is something that's very important. So we focus quite a bit on doing that. just take a very quick minute to talk a bit about meds and what we're doing with AI. But really, if you think about the profusion of data sources, so I mentioned obviously EDC and EHR, but you've got the lab data, you have images coming in, you have all the different data coming from sensors now as well. So you have patient-reported outcomes, but you also have sensor data that's starting to be incorporated in more and more trials. You have all the omics that are out there. And then you have financial data and you have documents. So there's a lot of different data sources. And how do you tap all of those and make sense from that? And that's one of the things that we're very, very focused on, is how do we start to make sense of this mash of different data? And quite frankly, it's a big challenge. I know it's a challenge. It's been within your organizations. It's always been a very big challenge. How do you take what were already the existing data assets and curate them in a way that you can make better decisions? But now we're adding more complexity because we're adding more different kinds of data on top of that. And you want all of those insights, right? Because of your roles, whether in data management or ClinOps or biomarker discovery or finance, or even surfacing some of that information, that knowledge back to the sites. Because the sites want to have insight as well as to what's going on in clinical trials. And so I think it's a huge opportunity, but at the same time, it's also a very, very large challenge. So I'm going to take a second to talk about the clinical trial of the future, because I think it's an interesting time to sort of start to think about it. So we're starting to hear about virtual trials, right, where the patient is not going to the clinic or not going to the clinic as frequently. And how do you manage that process? Or maybe you're using mobile tools. Obviously, we talked about sensor data, patient-reported outcomes, but maybe there's another form of mobile tool that you're using to gather your data in your clinical trial. You're looking more deeply into biomarkers. I think everyone is so aware of the importance of that today, especially as we look at oncology, but even very broadly. There's auto-coding of terms. There's, again, applying machine learning to how you take the data that you have and actually make it useful for you. We talk a lot about adaptive trials and master trials today. I can tell you, a decade ago, you weren't even talking about them. Maybe 5 years ago, you'd hear about one or two. Now, you're seeing a lot of them in the industry because there's real value behind them. And then synthetic controls as well. How do you create a synthetic patient so that you don't have to go out into the real world and find that one patient, particularly if you're thinking about a placebo arm for your trial? And then that was the science. So again, now let's look at the business of clinical trials in the future. You're using cross-industry benchmarks, right? So how do I become best in class in my operations? Because that's how I'm going to drive efficiency that allows me to reinvest in my business in a greater way. How do I automate payments? How do I automate the whole process if I can? End-to-end risk management is a really interesting topic. So can I do things in my trial that allow me to find bad data, to detect fraud, to find other issues before I submit to a regulatory agency and before I get that letter that says, go back, do it again, give me more insights, and I've delayed a drug getting to market by 6 months or a year or whatever, however long it takes. Are there things we can do that manage that risk along the way so that there's even less of a chance that you end up in a situation where you can't go to market when you really want to go to market, and with all the ramifications, and we've seen what they are, both for patients and in a financial sense for the organizations when that happens. And so I think an important takeaway is that if you think that some of the things I just talked about are really what the future of clinical trials looks like, then I think the big takeaway here is that it's actually happening today. It's not happening in every trial, but it's happening today. There are virtual trials, and I'll touch on a few of these in greater depth in a minute, but all the different things that I just pointed out are things that if you look at Medidata's platform, the clinical cloud, you'll see we're starting to do all of them, right? Whether it's auto-coding of terms or dictionary terms, whether it's adaptive and master trials, cross-industry benchmarking, you have access to that kind of information, to those tools that would allow you to run the kind of trial that you want to in the future, but you can do it today. You don't have to wait. And I think that's one of the most powerful things that we have been able to do to bring to the market. So let's take a quick look at a few of these. So today, we're running the largest virtual trial that's ever been run. It's 16,000 patients. We've already enrolled 9,000 patients for the sponsor. And there are no patients going into any investigator sites, right? This is around aspirin dosing. Really interesting trial. But the patients are signing in from home. We're getting that information from their homes. Now, do we think that all trials are going to become virtual trials? Of course not. That's never going to happen. Will there be trials that have a component that's virtual? Potentially. Will there be a subgroup of patients that may be virtual in trials? Very likely. So, but the world's open to that now. We can do virtual trials. And I think that adds just another arrow to our quiver of optionality, of things that we can think about when we're designing a clinical trial. So, master trials. Again, the idea of various sponsors contributing their drug in a head-to-head trial, it's not something we talked about a decade ago, but today we're doing that. Right? The BEAT AML master trial around myeloid leukemia is one of those trials where we have very, very novel treatments that are part of, or that are arms of this larger trial. And ultimately, the patient benefits from that. I think that's the exciting part for everyone involved. Thinking about how you use sensor data in a trial, we did a very innovative trial with GSK last year, a couple of years ago, where we used Apple's research kit, we used iPhones, and it was around rheumatoid arthritis. And people were using their phone and the accelerometer in their phone to measure what was happening, as they were moving their wrists throughout the duration of the trial. We captured all that data, and we were able to provide some really good insights. That's just a small example of the kinds of sensor data that's now starting to be incorporated in clinical trials. And obviously, you as the community of scientists and the organizations that are bringing drugs to market, you want that data. But the regulators want that data as well. The payers want that data. Everyone is interested in what's happening with patients when they're not just in the clinic, but when they go about their regular lives. And we want to understand what the quality of their lives are as we bring different therapies to them, because that's an important component of how efficacious a drug is. It's an important component, or will increasingly be, of how a drug gets reimbursed as well. So really interesting time for the industry and for all of us. And then synthetic controls. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. I don't know how many of you know or follow what happens at ASCO, but last year we were the first technology company to actually be represented at ASCO because we did some very unique work around synthetic controls. And really it's focused on, can we provide potentially a control arm for a clinical trial where you don't have to bring patients in ultimately who are going to be taking placebo? We haven't done that in production yet. We've certainly created that opportunity, that optionality, but we think we're not too far off. And in fact, we've been in some discussions with the FDA about the potentially using that for a pediatric study where you can synthetically control, you can create a synthetic control arm around patients. And so there are lots of opportunities out there. So a couple of other things. So how do we get to do all this? Because we talk about our data, we talk about our data strategy. Well, the first thing is you have to have a big ecosystem of customers and of partners, and I think we've been able to build that. So 1,000 customers, and they range from the largest pharmas in the world, 18 of the top 25, to the smallest biotechs as well. And that range is, I think, is actually quite remarkable. In fact, our 1,000th customer was a very small biotech company, and that was very cool for us. Our roots were working with much smaller companies. When Glenn and I started Medidata, we had 3 very, very small companies that were each working on one compound. They had one clinical trial each, and they were crazy enough to trust us with their most precious trials nearly 20 years ago. And obviously, I think it worked out reasonably well for them, and it's worked out extremely well for us. So beyond the sort of the industry collaboration and the customer base we have, we also have a big ecosystem that we've developed internally. So we have more than 2,000 employees. Sometimes I wake up and I think, wow, how did we go from 7 to over 2,000? So I think about 2,300 globally today. And we have a lot of site relationships, almost 500,000 site relationships at this point. That tells you the volume of clinical trials that we've run. We've served up 1 million e-learning courses. That number kind of blew me away as well. That's a lot of people taking our training, and a lot of people certified to use our systems. And I think as an organization, again, it's something really important for us to know that the industry overall has adopted us the way it has, and really understands who Medidata has been and who Medidata is becoming. And I'll touch on that in a minute. So one of the things that we philosophically have found to be, something that's sort of at the core of our business is, much as all of you or your organizations believe in research and development, so do we. We think that's our future. It's not spending lots and lots more on sales and marketing. It's putting what we can back into our development efforts, especially at a time that's as exciting as this is, because there are so many opportunities to work with all of you to kind of drive the science forward for ultimately for the sake of patients. So since over the last 5 years, excuse me, we spent about $500 million on development of our own technologies. And as you can see from the chart behind me, every year we've actually upped the stakes in terms of how much of our revenue we put back into research and development. It started at just under 20%, now it's over 25%. So a quarter of any revenue that we generate through sales goes back into R&D. And we think that's a very worthwhile investment, because it ultimately it ensures our future, it ensures innovation, and quite frankly, a lot of that investment is going into areas like data science, so that we have the right capabilities, and it's going into improving RAVE as well. Don't be too worried that we're neglecting the other just for the futures. I think it's pretty well balanced across our portfolio of solutions. But we're very proud of this fact, and it's philosophically, again, it's one of the things we've said we're a public company, we've said to our investors, where we're always going to spend money is on R&D, because that's the future for us, and we think that's the right investment for us. And so we've stood behind that over the last 5 years. And what has it led to at Medidata? Well, it's led to accelerated innovation. So in line with the industry accelerating innovation from a scientific perspective, we've accelerated our innovation, and you can see that from the timeline behind me. We're bringing more products to market and more solutions. And we're listening to our customers who give us feedback about what we can improve and also what we need to be doing so that we can help you do your jobs the right way as you think about the future and as you deal with the challenges of today, quite frankly. So I want to take a minute. The opening video talked about the architecture of hope, and this is a theme that we've talked about for the last couple of years. And I think, we as an organization think of ourselves as an enabler for all of you to more effectively do your jobs. At the end of the day, if we build technology that you can't use or you don't see value from, then we haven't done our jobs right. But we want to make sure that ultimately we can help our customers be successful, create value, and help patients. And let's take a closer look at that. So one of the topics we hear a lot about or talk a lot about is the importance of a unified platform. Well, why is that so important? Because clinical trials are complex. And as I said earlier, they're getting more complex. They're not getting easier to do. And the number of studies that are complicated gone up quite a bit. The cost, the timelines, we all know the metrics out there. If you're the CIO, it's daunting to be using so many different systems in clinical development. And so the importance of having a platform that's unified that allows you to simplify the process where you can becomes very important. And that's one of the things that obviously we as an organization have focused on and continue to focus on. It's like how to give you more and more solutions in one platform so you don't have to deal with some of the complexity, some of the integration issues, some of the data handoff issues that exist today that make, I think, ultimately doing your jobs and creating value much more difficult than it necessarily needs to be. Touched on analytics earlier. Obviously, you're going to hear more and more about that today. But you know, precision medicine is becoming something that's a commonality, if you will. And it's going to be even more so over the next 5 years and over the next decade. The use of sensors is another thing that has become, I don't want to say it's become regular or standard, but the growth of the use of sensor data has been tremendous. We've seen it in our own business, and we've seen it outside of it. You almost can't keep up with the demand you're seeing in the industry from folks who want to get other forms of data into their clinical trials. And then the use of biomarkers, so important, especially some of the advances we've seen in oncology over the last couple of years in particular. And so you need to make sure that you have a solution that allows you to bring all that data together that you need and put the right kind of analytic tools on top of it. And I think that's, again, an area of huge focus for Medidata. And I know it's an area of huge focus for the industry overall. But I think certainly in terms of AI capabilities and in terms of how we think about the data, we've made significant advancements. And I would be so bold as to say we're certainly leading, within the tech industry, we're certainly leading the charge there. And then all of that doesn't work unless you have a lot of expertise. And so, this is one of the more challenging industries. If you look across all the different kinds of industries that are out there, clinical development, the science, it's quite challenging, and you need a lot of knowledge. And I think, one of the things we pride ourselves on as an organization is that we have spent the time, in 2 decades, we've spent the money, we've brought people together who have a lot of industry expertise, and hopefully they're able to help you as customers of ours, of users of our solutions. Hopefully they're helpful to you as you look to move forward and as you look to use our technology to get the most value that you can. So I have the privilege now of asking a few of my colleagues to come up onto the stage and spend a few minutes to share to go a little bit deeper than I did in my opening remarks. And the first gentleman I'd like to ask to come up is Michael Tucker, who is our Senior Solutions Specialist on the mobile health side. Michael, give it to you.
Thank you, Tarek. All right. Well, one of our privileges in this company is seeing our user base grow, but also seeing the use of the technology grow. And over the past 20 years, we've gone from, gone from a EDC-centric technology to a broad-based technology platform that Tarek has talked about. This unified platform allows us to distribute our technology to many different stakeholders and users in the system. And one of our key users, or key stakeholders, are the patients. About 20% of our technology is focused just on gathering data from the patients. And we found that by getting patients more involved in the clinical trial, we're able to gather better data from them. As they become engaged, as they start to learn, they're educated, they're going through a consent process, they're being asked to share their information through mobile technologies, through sensors, different types of devices. We're able to gather better information, more qualified data for you. So we talk about our mobile health platform. We have a product base called Patient Cloud that fits into the unified platform. And that Patient Cloud platform is just focused on these technologies that reach out to patients. The suite is really designed to be easy to use. It's designed to be something that will engage the patient directly when they come into the clinic and they start learning about the study. It's a very reliable product base. It is very easy for the patients to use and convenient for them to use at the trial site or at home as well. We'll talk about it a little bit as we go forward here. So how does it work? We know that the first thing that a patient needs to do when they come into a clinical trial is be educated. A better educated patient on the front end is going to give you better information down the road. They're going to be more willing to stay on the trial as they learn about the risks, the benefits. They learn about what their rights and responsibilities are right up front, and they understand things like placebo, and they understand what it may mean if they don't get the trial drug, but they're going to be taking a placebo instead. Their data is just as valuable as the other patients on the trial. So that education process is critical. And then going from that education process into a consent, making sure that we do have an informed consent. And using technologies that we've developed, we're able to increase their comprehension level so that they do have a better understanding before they decide to join the clinical trial. Once they do consent, we can capture that electronic consent in the system, and we can trigger within RAVE, in this unified platform, trigger the automatic generation of a patient ID. Capture the information about when the patient consented, when they signed the document, when they were countersigned, and then we can also register them in other parts of the Patient Cloud platform. So we can register them for ePro, eCOA. We can distribute devices to them so that they can go home and capture information on diaries, capture information on different forms that they can fill out at home. We can also collect information through different types of devices or through sensors, through smartwatches, through, through different devices that might be issued by you as a sponsor that's going to bring data back into the system automatically so that we capture real-time data. In some cases, millions of data points that occur during the patient's contribution during the study. And then being able to synchronize this information with other parts of the data in the database, going back into RAVE and tie the information being collected from the patient back in there, and be able to give you a better understanding through the analysis of that information. The virtual trial platform that Tarek alluded to is something that's real. It's something we've had in place for a number of years now. We've done about 12 different virtual trials. And we have this concept that we're perfecting now called the trial dial concept. We know that not every study can be virtualized. Not every study can have patients contribute just from home, but there may be studies that patients have to come into a trial site periodically. We have studies right now where a patient comes in every other week and they share their information at the trial site, and then the other week at home, they're capturing their data from a device, whether it's an iPad, a smartphone, a tablet, or a device that they're using that may be attached to their body. And using this trial dial concept, we know that not every study is going to be 100% virtual. Not every study is going to be 100% at the trial site. But many studies are going to have 80% of the data that's being collected at the trial site and 20% that are being collected at home. Others are going to have 80% that are being collected at home and 20% that are being collected at the trial site. And so these different technologies tie back into the metadata platform that allow us to capture this data and make it more easy for you to virtualize the information, make it more easy for you to engage those patients wherever they are, at work, at home, etc. I'd like to invite you this afternoon to join me. I've got a session that will be talking about some of these case studies, like the adaptable study that Tarek mentioned, but understand a little bit more about this trial dial concept, how we've used e-consent to bring patients into studies, and how that's continuing to grow, especially we see in Europe now a lot more interest in growing that. And now I'd like to welcome to the stage my friend and colleague, Jeff Weiser, who's a Senior Director of Genomics at Medidata.
All right, thank you, Michael. So you've already heard quite a bit about, there we go. You've already heard quite a bit about the Medidata platform and how it supports many different data, many different users across the spectrum of a clinical trial. And one of the folks or groups that really are on the front lines of dealing with all these different types of data are the data managers. They're the folks who are going to have to deal with perhaps entering CRF data or checking CRF data, dealing with lab data, imaging data, genomics, sensors, across the line. And our platform now can support entering all of these data types across the spectrum of the trial from the beginning through the end. Once these data are all entered, MEDS really is the engine that allows us to ingest these data, quality control them, package them up together, curate them, and then make them analysis ready so that others can start to enable new discoveries. And this is where genomics comes into the play. So you hear a lot about precision medicine, you hear a lot about targeted therapeutics and biomarkers, and Tarek did a great job of introducing that previously. So what's going on? Why is there such a change all of a sudden? A big part of this is that the capabilities in doing sequencing, and both in DNA and RNA and metabolomic research, which is a parallel type of omic data, proteomics, is all exponentially increasing capability at about the same time. And this really allows us to get beyond the paradigm of treating every patient as genetically similar or metabolically similar, and to really get towards where the best treatment can be applied to that individual for a given indication based on safety or efficacy. The other thing that's changing dramatically is the cost of, in one case, in genomic sequencing. So when I started in the field about 20-odd years ago, working at a little biotech company called GeneLogic in the Washington, D.C. suburbs, there was a race going on at that time between the U.S. government, one of our neighbors, and Celera Genomics, another one of our neighbors, to try and complete the sequencing of the human genome, which was notionally completed in 2003, under budget, at $2.5 billion, under budget. So bearing in mind that cost, which was 2003, so 15 years ago, today the cost is somewhere along the lines of $500 to $1,000, depending on who you would ask. That's game-changing. I mean, now it's within the cost of doing something like an MRI in the United States. I don't know what the cost is in Germany. It's probably more reasonable, to be honest. But, but the point being that it can now be a common aspect of clinical care, or if not now, it will be shortly. And this is why, clearly, we wanted to move RAVE into the genomics space. In addition to the fact that these data are more specific and they're cheaper, it adds to more success in clinical trials. As Tarek mentioned earlier, clinical trials with molecular biomarkers, generally genomic, are 3 times more likely from phase 1 to the end to be approved. And I read a metric the other day which stated that 35% of the approved drugs last year from the FDA were precision medicine-related drugs. That's up from in the 20% in the prior years. So this is an accelerating trend that's not going anywhere. So obviously, we had to extend RAVE to be able to support genomics data. And following that Medidata data plan that was introduced earlier, we built these capabilities in the platform for ingesting data, using a user-friendly user interface. Sites and labs now can take the genomic data that they've generated at the variant level or the transcript level, literally drag and drop a folder, tell us what the patient identifier was, and it'll load it into the overarching metadata architecture, the cloud platform you're already used to, and link it together. And then you can do reporting. You can view a dashboard to see what the progress of the trial is. You can see perhaps some variants that are starting to jump up in specific patient populations early on. And it just gives you that overarching view of how the trial is going from a genomic data perspective. And it's using the same security model, the same roles and responsibilities that you may have programmed into RAVE, and you can add new roles, perhaps, if you only want the lab staff to see that little user interface and not see the rest of the context of the trial, et cetera. It's all configurable in an equivalent way to what you can already do in the rest of the platform. And another aspect that I think is sometimes undervalued in that data cleanup phase or pre-data curation phase that Tarek mentioned earlier is quality control in genomic data. Sample swaps happen, mistakes happen, and they're expensive mistakes. And in the current paradigm of many companies, you don't find this out until many years after the trial is completed, or some period of time after. Because often what happens is the clinical data is dumped out into some alternative database, linked up with the genomic data, and at sometimes some further research is done. By providing a way to bring the genomic data in during the conduct of the trial, you can find these issues earlier, and maybe you can even rectify them. Perhaps you can take another sample. Perhaps there's something you can do to figure out a way to recover that potentially lost data. We provide these quality control measures automatically at the time when the data is ingested. So we'll do things such as a gender check. So right now, this plot here shows the CRF gender, which is the red and the blue, and then the separation of the genomic data based on gender. So if there was a problem, you would see blue dots in the sea of red. So happens this is a nice clean data set for breast cancer. So of course there's a lot less male breast cancer patients than female. We're also adding in many other quality control measures such as outlier detection, consistency between genomic and other covariate labels, and other types of means of identifying sample repeats. But really, once you've finished the boring part of data management and quality control, it comes to the fun part of new discovery that everyone wants to talk about. Our Rave Genomics platform has already discovered evidence of new genetic biomarkers. In partnerships with pharmaceutical companies, who shall remain nameless, this one plot can show a high specific levels of a gene that's very important in immunotherapy, a possible new disease subtype in red, and also a quality control problem, where the biopsy was taken and too much tissue made it into the tumor biopsy. This is from one clustering algorithm run on the tool. So with that alone, you already get all these different insights. On top of that, we've started to work with groups such as pharmacovigilance, and their interest is in correlating adverse events to genomic signatures. Excuse me. You can imagine the value of being able to detect something like a preliminary indication of a massive autoimmune event that perhaps would save a patient's life in the scenario of an immunotherapy being applied. So long and short, the possibilities are endless when you apply genomic data to a trial during the conduct of the trial. This is a teaser. I'll have another talk this afternoon in the same room, going into more detail about how we're applying Rave Genomics. So please join me then. And in the interim, I'd like to invite, please, Rouven Bergmann, our CFO, to the stage. Please welcome. There you go.
Guten Morgen. Keine Sorge, ich werde Sie jetzt nicht mit einer Finanzpräsentation langweilen. Was mich wirklich fasziniert beim Medidata ist die Möglichkeit, die wir haben und die digitalen Strategien, über die heute jeder redet. Und es gibt unglaublich viele Buzzwords wie Machine Learning und Big Data. Aber wie sich das alles, wie wir all diese Konzepte nutzen, um in einem ganz konkreten Industrieprozess Wert zu generieren, Prozesse zu ändern und einfach bessere Ergebnisse zu erreichen. So, ich werde jetzt auf Englisch wechseln und meine Präsentation weiterführen, aber wollte es einfach nur als einleitende Worte sagen. Viele der Themen, die vorher hier schon andiskutiert worden sind, möchte ich einfach ein bisschen in einer breiteren Form darstellen, um die Möglichkeiten einfach auch nochmal aufzuzeigen. Okay, so it's all about the opportunity. I think we all agree. You saw a lot of data points and issues that we refer to, that we are trying to address through our unified platform technology that we've built. And then there's another aspect that you hear a lot about, that's the digital revolution. So there's a lot of hype around artificial intelligence and big data and how this can actually impact businesses and whole industries. And I personally spent my entire life in different finance functions, but all in software and technology. And today, nobody thinks about doing bookkeeping on a piece of paper. Like nobody does clinical trials on paper, or at least most of the companies don't do it in paper. It's electronic data capture is is kind of the gold standard of how to manage data in clinical trials. So there are great examples of where digital strategies have already been successfully applied and changed business processes. But I would argue, and I come later to some of the challenges and how we as a company are solving and addressing those challenges, there's still a lot to be done and a lot to be addressed, and that's in front of us. So let's talk a little bit about those challenges. Tarek, I think, mentioned it. It takes us 10 years from initial discovery to approval of a drug, and only 10% of phase 1 trials are actually, on average, making it to a successful drug that's approved in the market and is commercially available. These are pretty drastic numbers, and especially when you now translate them to the financial implications. I think the number of 2.6 billion is a number that's been quoted many times, but there should be, and I'm personally convinced there is, a lot that can be done to make this number much, much smaller by applying modern technology and rethinking the process to come up with a process that is not as expensive. And also when you look at the return on investment measured over a period of time, and that comes back to a number of studies that I personally looked at because I'm interested in this subject. Then you would think as a CFO you would always care about your return on investment. But if somebody would come to me and present a business case that it takes 7 years, cumulated revenue over 7 years, and before an investment of over 7 years, and the uplift is only 10% over that period, that's not a good business case. But that's kind of the facts that we are dealing with, and the question will be what can we actually do about it, and how can some of those digital strategies, and I come to this here on this slide, actually help us to address those challenges. And I know some of you might think that these are buzzwords, but I think there's a lot of value behind if we really think through this and apply it to our problems that we are facing. The first one is big data. I think Tarek summarized this already. It's not about aggregating massive amount of data. It's about finding the right data that is fit for purpose. And what we really work very hard on, and you saw that on the Medidata Enterprise Data Storage, MEDS, is to build an infrastructure and technology that allows to ingest multiple sources of data so that we have one common environment and not silos. So here really what it's all about is to eliminate data silos, bring them together, and specifically real-world evidence data, clinical trials data, and genomics data, which we think is most important to really bring into one place. The second part, artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I will have later a very, very good business case and use case on where we applied artificial intelligence and the results we were able to achieve. That makes it, from my perspective, in a very simple way, very beneficial to use those type of technologies. But what it really gets us is it helps us to optimize trial processes. It helps us to analyze data patterns and really understand risk in our data much earlier as to compared when essentially everything is completed and you do an analysis on the past and you have no ability to impact it in real time and really drive actions. So I think that's a very, very powerful concept. Data amplification, we also talked about this before, which really means we are able to bring data together also across clinical trials. That's when Tarek mentioned earlier, we've spent a lot of time with our data science team to actually harmonize the data so that it can be brought together cross trials and also cross sponsors. And I think that's a very foundational innovation. And then real-time. You hear the notion of real-time in many different contexts, but operating in time and moving from latent and latent processes that essentially try to fix things that happened already some time ago into the here and now really puts you in control and gives you an opportunity to operate and interact when it matters most. So these are the 4 concepts that I think are the most powerful innovations when we think about digitization and the digital strategy, and what we really do with this as we think about our product innovation and products we've built and see a tremendous value in. Now I want to spend some time on two examples. And the first one is our strategic monitoring platform that we launched at the end of last year, which is is today the only platform that really brings together all the aspects of monitoring and enables real-time operations. And what it does, to start with, it gives you the ability to first define your KPIs, your risk KPIs, so that the aspects that you actually want to measure and care about. But also it combines machine learning and pattern analysis so that you can identify outliers while the trial is ongoing. And with that also measure your risk in the process in real time. Of course, this should help to reduce costs because it's always much more beneficial if you identify an issue early in the process, you fix it, as compared to when it is quite some time ago, then it's very hard and potentially very costly to address those issues. And most importantly, we developed this platform to comply with new regulations, so the ICH E6 guidelines that I think from my interaction with customers, they're very concerned about how to implement this, and is there technology and some frameworks that help us to implement that in a structured way. I think that's the place to go, and that is how we thought about it to really bring this all together. The second example, I think, is a great use case of where artificial intelligence and pattern analysis really creates a tremendous amount of insights and values as trials are ongoing. So we had two clients that were working on a similar treatment, pretty much at the same point in time, both rave customers. And one customer who we engaged with, and we engaged with, used our Edge trial assurance, which is the mathematical algorithms to analyze data patterns and identify outliers, inconsistencies in the data as the trial is ongoing. So we were able to provide this technology. We had some of our data scientists cooperating with the customer to identify some of those inconsistencies, so the customer was able to address them during the ongoing trial, mitigate those risks, submitted the data, received the approval. And because of this extra analysis and extra step that was taken, was able to actually submit in time with successful approval. The second customer, as I said, also a Medidata customer, didn't take that extra step, submitted the data. Some of those inconsistencies that we were able to identify through these modern algorithms were the reason why the FDA delayed and didn't approve the submission at that point in time, so it resulted in a delay. While, as I said, there was a successful launch, the other customer had a delay in their submission of a number of months, which when you think about time to market and the ability to deliver on time, it's not only about saving costs, it's about actually enabling growth and faster time to market. So I want to wrap it up at this point and hand it over back to Tarek for some closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Rouven. Is the mic on? No? Yes? There we go. Perfect, thank you. So I thank you, Rouven and Michael and Jeff. You know, one of the things I was thinking about, I was sitting there, is I really have a very privileged position because I work with great people. And, you know, it's a wonderful industry. The journey we as a company have had has been tremendous. And I think that's, you know, it's always, you know, you think about what is the end goal, but the journey is the great part. And getting to work with folks like this and the folks that are in the room and our customers and partners really has been something that's been tremendous for me, and as a founder, I think something I take a lot of joy in, and I still get to have fun with. You know, that's one of the things is our industry is so vibrant and there's so much going on. It's such an exciting time that I think it's really wonderful to be part of it. And so I think as we think about our agenda for the day today, you're going to hear some great guest speakers. I think hopefully you'll learn some interesting things as well, some new opportunities, some new ways of thinking about things. But it's really about bringing all the different roles together. That's very important from my perspective, because you know, you have data managers, you have ClinOps, you have folks at the investigator sites, and you have the patients. And how do you connect all of those? How do you share the right information, the right level of information and insight with all the different folks? And that's something that we focus on at Medidata, and what we try to do with the platform as we're seeing it evolve. Because we remember the days when it was just EDC. You know, that's how we built Medidata. But today, you're touching so many more different participants in the whole development process. And that process will continue to evolve, you know, as patients become more proactive. And we're seeing even some of the impact of social media. And we didn't touch on that today, but that's even having an impact on trials and blinding and all the questions that are coming up. And so our world is evolving very, very rapidly. And we're very thrilled to be able to participate in that. Other thing I wanted to leave you with is that obviously we will have a guest speaker up in a moment, but we do have other next events coming up. We have one in London in April, and then there's a series of them around the world, culminating in a very large one in New York as well. And so we invite you to have your colleagues or you join us for any one of them. The topics evolve a little bit as the year goes on. But we found that, you know, after the success last year, we found that doing this, getting out and talking about what we think are relevant topics and talking about really trying to explain a little bit more about Medidata is very important for our customers and for our partners, because to some extent we made such a reputation for ourselves as an EDC company that in many people's eyes we still are an EDC company, and yet as you heard from Rouven and from Jeff and Michael, capabilities have really expanded to a great degree to allow you to sort of become more innovative in your organizations as well. So I want to hand it over. I want to ask Christian to come up now, and we'll have our next speaker join us shortly.
Thank you so much. Thank you.